Hello. I believe the cold weather is over with. The weather we had in March is almost unbelievable. One morning in March it was, I think, around 13 degrees, which is almost unheard of for that time of the year. I was just sitting here today on a Sunday afternoon, kind of reflecting back on YouTube and this past winter. It's been so long since we've had snow in East Tennessee. You would normally think that living in East Tennessee would be a snow area, but we seldom have any snowfall. Usually when we do, it's pretty spectacular. One of the largest snowfalls we ever had was in March. I forget what year that was, but I think I had a Camaro automobile, and when I got up that morning, it was completely covered with snow. When I came out of the military back in the 60s, we had some pretty significant snowfalls in 1960, but nothing like that snowfall we had that March. And if you live in and around East Tennessee, or I think they also had quite a bit of snow down in Middle Tennessee. But snowfall is rare in East Tennessee. One year I remember I went to Nashville to pick up my son. He flew in from Phoenix, Arizona, and it was kind of raining down in Nashville. And when we got back to East Tennessee, we had 6 or 7 inches of snow. I don't remember what month that was. One year, when I was working down in Oak Ridge, they had a snowfall, and either they ran out of road salt. I don't really know what happened, but they didn't scrape the road, and the automobiles packed the snow down, and then they couldn't scrape it because it was ice. And for, like a week, when you would go to Oak Ridge, it was like back during the days of dirt roads when the roads would be rutty. That was kind of an unusual time in Oak Ridge, but that's what I was told. They failed to scrape the road, and the temperature dropped and it froze, and then they were stuck with it. Other snows, when I was very young, let's see, that would probably be, 38, 39, 40, 41. Either 1941 or 1942. When we lived in Anthrace, if I remember correctly, we had a lot of snow back then. Of course, when you're a young child, you have a tendency to remember things not exactly the way they were. But in my mind, the house we lived in was at the end of a dirt road on the lower side of the tipple in the mining camp between the tipple and the creek. And in my vision of that time, I'm looking out the window, and it has snowed. We had these posts that was part of a fence, and I can see the snow piled up on top of the post. but it was after the snow, and it had cleared, the sky had cleared, and there must have been a full moon. And now this may be so far from the way it was, but this is the way I remember it as 5 or 6 year old kid. A full moon glistening off the snow. It's a memory that I see a lot. If you're listening to this, you probably excuse me. You probably have visions of things that you saw when you were a child that never leave you. Well, that's one that I have. I can always see that just as if it was yesterday. Looking out the window and seeing the snow and a full moon. I'd say it was a full moon because it was as bright. Those memories, I don't know why I was thinking of them today. Probably because I'm just kind of sitting here on a Sunday afternoon. Pat, she went over town. I think she went over to get some greeting cards or something. And I was just sitting. Normally, I'm on Facebook jabbering. But this afternoon, I just got to thinking about places that I'd been, thinking about my family. I don't get to see them as much as I used to for some odd reason or another. Everybody now has so much going on in their life that you really don't get to see your family that much. Also, I've been trying to figure out how I could go to Svalbard or Longyearbyen. It's an island off the coast of Norway. It's fairly close to the North Pole. I think it's like 800 miles from the North Pole. I'm sure that I'll never go to Longyearbyen and Svalbard. Svalbard, I guess that's the way you pronounce it. I believe it's a cashless society up there. I don't believe anyone uses cash. If you don't have a credit card, you probably couldn't buy anything in Longyearbyen. And another odd thing about Longyearbyen, you can go there without a passport. When you arrive there, no one asks for a passport. But if you come in on Norwegian Airlines to go into to go into Norway, you would have to have a passport. But there are people who come into that area on yachts, and they can come into that port of Longyearbyen, and they don't have to have a passport. There was some kind of a treaty, you can Google it, where all of these different companies signed a treaty, and it's kind of the Russians have some coal mines there. There's one place called Pyramiden, and a few years ago they abandoned that coal mine and left the town. I think they had an agreement or had signed a contract with it. It's a Norwegian island, and they had signed a treaty with the Norwegians that they could mine coal there, but if they ever left it, they would have to revert it back to the Norwegians, something like that. So what they did is when they closed it, they left a contingent of caretakers to maintain the place. But it is really a ghost town. Some entrepreneur, I think, went in there and opened a hotel. But if you've never heard of these places, you can Google it. It's it's a mysterious place. And I have created a lot of Facebook posts where I talked about Svalbard, Longyearbyen, and Pyramiden. Let's see, there's another town, it's called Brandenburg, I think, and it is a Russian village. I think they, I don't know if they have a research station there or they do mining. I know a little bit about the place, but you can tell I don't know everything about the place. But what they do is people who come in there to work, they bring their families, and when they bring their families, they quarantine them for a certain amount of time to make sure that they don't have any communicable diseases. So what they have done is practically eliminated the cold germ. No one gets a cold in Brandenburg, I think. You can, if I've whetted your appetite on making you search for a little more information on some of those places I was talking about you anymore, anytime you hear anything, you can go to Google and you can become an expert, which I am not. I just, I like to read things that I really want to read. And some places I dwell into just a little bit more. But I know in Longyearbyen, it's against the law to die in Longyearbyen. Years ago, I think back in the 20s, they had I guess it was during the pandemic, the flu pandemic, some miners passed away and they're buried there. And they say that the flu virus still exists in the permafrost of the permafrost preserved those people, and that's the reason they will not let you die in Longyearbyen, because you can't be buried there. So they've just made a thing out of it, and they've passed a law that you can't die in Longyearbyen. Well, that's my Sunday afternoon rambling. It's kind of lonely here. Just on the weekend, it's not so bad, or during the weekdays, I usually have some projects that I'm working on. But it just so happened that this Sunday afternoon I had no projects, and I was kind of missing some of my grandkids today. But I do that quite often. Well, thank you very much for listening. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.